All right, so today I'm going to show you how to make hand-rolled pasta, and I'm going to do it completely by hand. I'm not going to use a machine. People have been making pasta for thousands of years before they had machines. So it should be fun. The pasta I'm going to show you is an Italian egg pasta. There are literally hundreds of different types of egg pastas. Pastas can be made with different types of flours. They can be made with different, with eggs or without eggs, with just water, depending on whether you're going to use them fresh or whether you're going to dry them out. You can make pastas with buckwheat flour and rice flour, lots and lots of different pastas around the world. This is going to be a basic pasta that we're going to build up, show you how to do a couple cuts today, and then we'll end our sort of time together with a lasagna. Since we've made a meat sauce, we've made a tomato sauce, we've made a bechamel sauce, now we're going to make the pasta for it. And just to show you a couple of the varieties of different flours we have, there's a flour, it's not readily available, so I'm not going to use it. I use this a lot if I'm making it for myself. It's called 00 pasta, and you can see it's very, very powdery. It's almost the powder of like the texture of like a talcum powder. The 00 just basically means it's ground finer and passed through a very, very small sieve, so the grains of flour are extremely, extremely small. So it makes a really nice bite, particularly in Italian pastas and pizza and stuff like that. Another common pasta that you will see, or pasta flour that you will see, is called semolina, which almost looks like very fine kind of yellow corn grits. This is used to make pasta as well, and has a very nice kind of tooth to it. Generally, when I'm making pasta, I will do sort of a combination of the two, half and half or so. But again, there's lots of different variations, and depending on what you're using it for and what your preference is. But I'm assuming that most people are not going to have sort of artisanal flours available for them, so I just have some all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour is perfect for this. It's perfect to learn the technique on, and again, this is a technique rather than a specific recipe. And yeah, so that's what we're going to use, is just basic white, unbleached, all-purpose flour. So the reason why I like doing pasta by hand, even though you can do it in a machine, is particularly when you're learning, is you want to learn what the pasta feels like, and you want to learn sort of the proper texture and the proper feel of the pasta, and you can't get that by putting it in a machine. And a machine isn't going to necessarily know if it's too wet or if it's too dry. So it's really good when you're learning to try it by hand. And I have here, it's 200 grams of all-purpose flour. I usually would do 100 grams of semolina, 100 grams of 00. But this works out perfectly fine for what we're doing here. That's about 1 3/4 cup if you don't have a kitchen scale. And I'm going to put in a pinch of salt, because we've got to have a little salt in there. I'm going to put in a little glug. I have 2 whole eggs and 1 extra egg yolk, and I'm going to put in a little glug of olive oil, because it's Italian, it's got to have some olive oil. What the olive oil does is it helps sort of shorten and soften the gluten strands that we're going to create by mixing our eggs into our flour, and then kneading and kneading and kneading and kneading. And I'm going to start in the bowl, make kind of a little indentation in the bowl. Yeah, you can see that. I'll pour in my eggs. And the trick of this is eggs are different sizes. So if your eggs are particularly large, you might need proportionally a little bit more flour. If they're particularly small, you might need proportionally a little less flour. And a machine isn't going to be able to tell that. And what I will do is, if it feels like it's going to be too wet, I'll add a little more flour to it. If it feels like it's going to be a little too dry, I will add a little water. And I stir it up until I've incorporated in This is why I do it in a bowl. I'll turn it out onto the, let's get that in the shot there. Turn it out onto the table once it all kind of comes together. Otherwise you just have a mess. So you want to make sure that whatever table or cutting board or whatever you're working on is nice and clean. I took off my ring. The trick is remembering to put it back on. So once it kind of comes together, I can get in there with my hands and just start kind of squeezing it together. It's feeling a little dry, but I don't want to make any diagnoses yet. I'm going to get all of that flour incorporated in. I think it actually might be okay. All right, now when it's come together, what I'm actually going to do, that is what that flour is, or the dough is incorporating. It's going to leave these little pieces behind. I'm going to turn it out onto my table. I'm going to start kneading it. And when I'm kneading it, what I'm going to do, see how out of breath I get. See how out of shape I am. What I'm going to do is take my palm and kind of press into the dough. And I'm going to use my body weight, so I'm not making it a real workout. I'm going to use my body weight to kind of lean into the dough, pick up all these pieces. And what this is doing is this is allowing the liquid in the eggs to sort of expand the starch molecules and start the gluten development in the flour. And that is feeling a little dry. So I'm going to take literally a tablespoon, like a teaspoon of water. Just going to pour it right over it. And then my next couple kneads are going to be adding that water to it. It's going to make a little mess, and then it'll come back together. It's feeling much better just from that little bit. It's going to be a little slippery for a bit as it kind of comes together. So you can see I'm going for about 2 minutes that I didn't record because it's just going to be repetitive. You can see how I'm kneading. I take my palm and push it forward. Got to pull it back, take my palm and push it forward. So my fingers aren't really doing a lot. I'm using my body weight, I'm using my palms, and you can see how it's incorporated that water that was there and picked up the stuff that was left. And now it feels kind of sticky. You can feel it, kind of hear it kind of sticking there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep doing this for 4 or 5 minutes. A little bit of a workout. It gets easier as you do it. But what we're trying to do is get those gluten strands to soften and get the dough to be really nice and uniform. And it should feel soft, like soft leather or, I don't know, like a soft piece of fabric almost. Whatever metaphor works best for you. It shouldn't be sticky. See how it's not sticking to my fingers anymore? And it's not tacky. Maybe silly putty. Do they still make silly putty? Am I aging myself? I don't know. I'm just talking now. You see, I'm a little bit out of breath, but that's just because of COVID and I'm insanely out of shape. But I'm not breaking a sweat. Just kind of rocking back and forth. I find it very kind of meditative almost to do this. And I'm going to do about 3 or 4 minutes that you don't have to watch. All right. So there we go. What I've got, one of the things you want to look for is that when you pinch it, it kind of holds your indentation. It doesn't snap back. If it snaps back, the gluten's still a little tight. You want to work it a little bit more. But that's where we are. And you notice how the table is pretty clean, because as I was kneading, I was picking up the remaining little pieces of flour and the remaining little pieces of the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in some saran wrap, or you could use a moist towel, depending on how long you're going to let it sit. I'm going to let it sit in the fridge for about half an hour, at least half an hour. It can sit overnight if you need it to. But that allows the gluten to rest, and then I will show you how we roll it out and make our pasta shapes. All right, so now my pasta, my dough, see how nice and resilient it is? You can pinch into it and it doesn't really snap back. The gluten is relaxed and ready to be rolled out. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna cut it into 2 pieces. Keep one of them wrapped up and on the side. Oh, this is not for you, Mr. Boy. I'll sit this over here. I'm going to have on the side a bag of my flour, because I want to put down a little bit of dusting while I'm working with the pasta. That's going to keep it from sticking. And I'm going to use a rolling pin. And I'm sure you've seen, I will probably show you a video of how to do this with a machine, but again, pasta was made for years before we had electricity. So you can see it's still a little, see how while I pull it, the whole thing kind of moves with me. That means the gluten is kind of still pretty tight. And if you notice what I'm doing, I start in the middle and kind of push out. I'm sort of coaxing it out. Again, I'm not putting a lot of weight into it. I'm letting just sort of the mechanics of rolling. Flip it over every now and then. I might have to let this rest a little bit longer, because as it sits and rests, that gluten will get a little bit less elastic and we'll be able to stretch out. And if this was pizza dough, this was when you'd see the person picking it up and throwing it between their hands. But it's not pizza dough. I don't know why I just said that. Maybe I'm craving pizza. So what I'm doing with my rolling pin is, see, it's very elastic at the moment. So what I can actually do is I'm going to let this one sit to the side, and that's going to allow that gluten to relax. And I'll work on my second piece as well. A little bit of flour, a little bit of flour. And we'll start the same process. Because what you often find yourself having to do is stretching it, letting the gluten relax, stretching it, letting the gluten relax, and then cutting it into the shapes that you want. And this is a great all-purpose dough. You could make raviolis with this. You can make tortellonis with this. You could make just fettuccine, linguine, any sort of simple pasta shape. But then there are other pastas that do better with a dough made of water without the egg, such as like orecchietti, like the little ears you kind of pinch between your fingers, and anything that has to be pressed through an extruder, like spaghetti or something, does better with a flour and water. But there's so many different variations. The purpose of this exercise is to just try it and see how really easy it is, and really how kind of fun it is. I find this very meditative. I could do this. I cook pasta for most dinner parties that I have. I'm gonna have some kind of fresh pasta just because I like to do it. I don't necessarily love eating pasta all the time, but when people ask me what's my favorite thing to make, I will generally say hand-rolled pasta. So these have both kind of reached the point where they're starting to stretch back. So when I pull it and it stretches back, so I'm going to let them sit for 10-15 minutes or so covered so that they don't dry out, and then I will continue cutting them. All right, so I am going to roll out my pasta a little more to get it nice and thin. There we go. See how when it's rested, it doesn't pull back as much. I think I'm going to actually cut this in half so we can get it nice and long. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. And then it's just a matter of you keep rolling and resting and rolling and resting. If you do this with the machine, it's obviously a little bit faster, but as I said, it's very easy to do without a machine as well. And for next week, we'll just be cutting it into these sheets and using it for lasagna. And once it gets to the point where it's not really stretching anymore, that's when you know you've got to let it rest. So I'll do my second piece. There we go. Gluten can be very tricky to work with when it's very elastic. All right, so it took maybe 4 or 5 more times of letting it rest and then rolling it out for it to get this nice and thin, this nice thin sheet. When we're making our lasagna next week, we'll just kind of leave it like this. If we were going to make raviolis, we could put little dollops of whatever we wanted, meat or cheese or whatever, and place another one on top and then just cut out our raviolis. But what we're going to do this time, since this is our first time doing this, is I'm just going to roll it up, and I'm rolling it up not very tightly, not folding it in on itself. And I'm going to take my knife and letting the knife do the cutting, not slamming down. Let's go for a nice little, we'll call it like a tagliatelle shape. So not too thick, not too thin, not as thick as fettuccine, not as thin as an angel hair. But you want the knife to do the cutting so it doesn't press everything in together. And then what we will do is we'll stretch out our pieces of pasta. Some will be a little longer than the others. Doesn't matter at all. There we go. And we stretch them out. If I was going to not cook these for a couple hours or so, I could toss them with a little bit of flour so they don't stick together, like so. It'll also help keep them sort of dry out a little bit and they won't stick together. And then as soon as you drop that into the water, that flour is going to work its way into the pasta water and then will be used to make a sauce or whatever. But that's how we make our nice little, look how nice that is. So easy, so easy. If you had a pasta machine, it would go much quicker, but it's not all that much more difficult to do it this way. And it just takes a little bit more time. And a little bit more muscle. So I'm going to show you a couple sauces to work with that as I cut my other pastas, but that is how easy it is to make our pastas. And I wish I should have thought of it. I have several colleagues and friends who are absolute pasta masters. Colleague Jessica makes beautiful hand rolls pastas, and a former student, Michael, is always posting on Facebook these amazing shapes that he's making, and I am in awe of their skills. But for first time trying to make a pasta, I think this is a great recipe and a great technique to learn, and I hope you enjoy it.